All right, you guys. So it's another episode of Change the Conversations. We are changing some conversations today. We're not even entirely sure what we're changing or where this conversation is going to go. But we know it's going to be real and powerful because parts 1 and 2 already were. We are back with Kate Shipp, and I could not be more thrilled for this conversation. She was very intentional about how we laid the groundwork for this too. Part 1 was on grief and processing big emotions and big life events, and was very open and honest about the passing of her father. And part 2, we dove into how critical it is in the healing process to create a safe space within ourselves. If we can't regulate our nervous systems and find some safety somewhere, we're not going to have any kind of room or emotional bandwidth to grow and heal. And today we agreed to talk about sex. And that's one of my favorite passion topics. I am very committed to helping women understand their bodies and have better sex. And given, if you start to even stack any of the issues we face, traumas around births and delivery, miscarriages, battles with infertility, rape, marital issues, and things that are traumatic, and where in a committed relationship, consent can get very blurred and lines can get crossed, molestation, childhood trauma, really painful periods and other disease processes. If you start to stack up any of those, the chance that someone is walking through our doors, especially a woman is walking through our doors, mine or Kate's, without some sort of pelvic and sex-related trauma is almost zero. It's almost zero. So we're going to get into it today. And I could not possibly be more grateful for you, friend. And I don't think I'd want to be having this conversation with anybody else. And I guess I'm kind of sweating. Before we started, we were just already talking about the nervous system challenges we've had this week, and it's only the middle of Wednesday. But anyway, where do you want to start with your story?
Well, I want to thank you for having me back a third time. And thanks for those that are tuning into part 3, as we've been kind of teasing this one since part 1. And for those who may not have listened to parts 1 and 2, so I'm a holistic trauma specialist and energy intuitive. I work in more of the realms: yoga therapy, breath therapy, energy medicine, spiritual direction. I also own an integrative trauma-informed wellness center in Glendale, Arizona, called Live Well Training Center. So I work in the realm of trauma healing every day with clients, mostly women, some men. And I specialize in working with sexual trauma, mostly because I lived it. So we can start with background, if we want, a little bit of why this topic is so important to me. And I'm going to be really vulnerable, you guys. This is the first time I'm speaking publicly on this topic. And Amy's the only person that I have met thus far in my journey that I would feel safe enough to have this conversation with. So I thank you, Amy. Amy was actually a big part of why I can have this conversation in the first place. And I want to name that sexual trauma originated in my life when I was 2. So there will be a lot of stories shared in this that may be hard for you to hear if you're listening or watching. So be gentle with yourself through this at all as well through it. I think that's important to name. I remember when I was healing and listening to podcasts, and the person speaking would just say things and I'd be like, whew, like it hit my nervous system so hard. So there will be some hard things shared. I'm not going to share details of things, but I was abused from the time I was 2 to 6 by my dad's father, so my paternal grandfather. And he was someone who unfortunately did this to a lot of people, kids and women. And that led me to have various experiences throughout my life around feeling safe. That's part of why we talked about the last one, about recreating safety, having a sense of safety within our bodies again. And I also was raped at 17 by my then boyfriend. And then there were other sexual traumas I encountered. I was drugged at 18 and kind of left for dead. And I had sexual trauma happen to my body then at the same time. And so my body's been through a lot in the realm of sexual traumas. I have two amazing children. They're 17 and 14. My pregnancies with both of them were really, really difficult. And I didn't know at that time, and I wish I did, that because I had these unresolved sexual traumas, my body didn't want to accept the pregnancies very well. And so during the pregnancies with my son, I had early labor at 30 weeks. I was able to hold the pregnancy till 36 and a half. With my daughter, I went into labor at 24 weeks and I was able to hold the pregnancy until 38 weeks. How did I do that? Through my practices that I work with every day with people in the holistic realm of things. I'm super sensitive to medications. And so I would have ill side effects from meds that they were trying to give me. And so I had to learn how to listen to my body again, how to connect to my body. Yoga is one of the ways that I did that. And there's a lot of different tools and practices that we can talk about through this on this episode if we want to help. But I think also to inform guys that when I was learning through my journey, I had no idea how many women suffered in the way that I have and suffer the way that I have, right? From sexual trauma to pregnancy traumas, pre, post natal, all of the experiences of the body and what happens, and then trying to have intimate relationship with your spouse, with your partner, with yourself, and learning how to really renegotiate a relationship of intimacy and pleasure. I was so naive, so ignorant, so uneducated in any of this, like completely. Um,
Well, I want
and
to pause for a second
yeah,
and explain to our listeners that because I know you and I view this similarly, but we're using the word suffering very, very intentionally.
yeah,
Suffering can stop,
mm,
and suffering is this prolonged, dragged out. We have the trauma, right? And we have what should be the natural process of healing and recalibrating and regaining our footing after. But when suffering happens, it's that process doesn't get to occur. So there's no resolution. And so things are dragged out. And the suffering is in the not being heard, in the not knowing how to find that more complete healing, in the nature of which things get triggered again, like her pregnancies, not recognizing or knowing how to handle any of the feelings and things and patterns that get ingrained and perpetuated. And so when we're talking about this suffering, it I don't want to diminish any of this, so I'm being very careful, but it doesn't have to be that way. And it's avoidable, it's fixable, but we're not given the tools. So that's where both our hearts come from, is again, absolutely not diminishing, because none of it's not your fault that you have ongoing suffering. But that's why we're both so passionate about the work that we do, because we want to end the suffering. That's one of my whole things, the tagline things is no settling, no suffering, no shame. So we're going to hit all of that today. So I just wanted to pause on that suffering piece, because it's been a majorly critical shift in my life to look at where I'm allowing or perpetuating my own suffering in different ways. So I just wanted to pause on that for a second, but please.
I think that's so important. I'm so grateful you paused and named that. And from the yoga therapy background that I come from, we they talk a lot about how pain is inevitable. We're all going to experience pains in life, and everyone's pains are different and vast and cover a wide variety of areas and topics. And that suffering is avoidable if we have the right tools, resources to support, to be able to alleviate the suffering, to really manage the pain. It's one of my very favorite two very favorite quotes about yoga as a practice for this is that yoga teaches us to cure what need not be endured and to endure what cannot be cured. So there are some things in life that are curable, that we have tools that we don't have to endure and suffer. And then there are some conditions that people experience that are terminal or they don't have a cure. And then there's practices that help us endure them with more grace and ease and less suffering. And the other, quote from yoga, and the first one was from, I believe, Patabi Joyce. The second one, no, the first one, I'm sorry, was Iyengar. And the second one is from a teacher named Desikachar. And he says that the practices of yoga, right, it's not about performing a perfect pose, it's about how it changes your life. And that if it doesn't change your life for the better, it's not yoga. And so when we look at these things, and it's part of why I'm setting up this framework, is these certain practices helped me to be able to have these conversations, to be able to navigate these really, really, I'm going to use the word scary and muddy waters of this whole realm of sex and this whole realm of intimacy and connection and pleasure. Because I think, and I'm going to go here, I think a lot of people have sex without connection and intimacy. Would you agree with that?
100% agree. I'm trying to think if I know of anyone who would say they haven't. I don't think it's possible. Even the most benign, like disconnect because you're mentally distracted.
Yeah,
That's sex without connection.
sure. So our bodies
Yeah.
know how to go through the motion. And then there's a very different experience of being embodied, meaning you feel soulfully, spiritually connected to this physical being that you are, which allows you to have that connection to another human being in that way.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. We can either let you move on with your story. I feel like I want to go back at some point. I think you should probably continue your story, but I'm just making notes here, but I want to go back to what I think happens for so many women who have early trauma and then have pregnancies and some of the things that go on, and we have no framework for connecting those dots.
Yeah, I think we can go there. I think there'll be parts of my story that get sprinkled in as it's relevant. I mean, I really had no idea. So we backtrack a little bit. Much like many of us, my brain, for my own well-being and safety, blocked the memories of my early childhood sexual trauma. I would have nightmares from the time I was 6 years old of certain things happening to me. My nightmares were often of vampires, and the vampires would be biting me in inappropriate places. And I never understood these nightmares. And the nightmares built throughout my life where, like, my husband would have to wake me up. My cat would wake me up. And he's no longer with me. He's now in spirit, but he would jump on my body and pat my face to wake me up when I was having these nightmares. And they were repetitive and they were horrific and so scary. And I didn't understand that that was my subconscious way of trying to process out some of what happened until January of 2016. I started having more vivid nightmares and memories of certain scenes that I couldn't understand. It was kind of like if you got the first few minutes of a movie and a couple minutes in between and then the end, but you're like, wait, how did that all come together? And eventually my body unearthed it, and all of the memories of 2 to 6 years old being abused came. And so some people have said, well, why do you think it came out then? And why? And I said, because I think I had had enough tools and education and resource and safety in my life by that point that I didn't need it stored in me anymore. So it was coming out to help me heal. It was just for my system, it was terrifying. And when I was pregnant, so I had my son in 2006, my daughter in 2009. This happened in 2016, right? So 10 years after my first pregnancy, my body revealed all these things. I had remembered the rape. I had remembered being drugged and having overdosed and had 2 near-death experiences that night. That I remembered, I had no idea about these other pieces. My body started remembering, this is my belief. My body started remembering when I was pregnant with my son. And my subconscious was trying to tell me, which to me, the subconscious lives in our fascial tissues of our body. My subconscious was trying to tell me through my dreams all the time, but it was telling me in metaphor and in um, archetype instead of in literal, here's what happened to you. And so getting pregnant with my son, which was planned, and we were so excited because it took almost a year to get pregnant. And then all of a sudden, my body was almost rejecting having the pregnancy at a certain point. And I had no idea that that could possibly be connected to sexual trauma. Like it was never a thought at all. And I've
Well,
met a
like you
lot of
said, the
women.
other memories hadn't surfaced yet. And
No.
why, again, when you're now in a healthy relationship,
Hmm.
you think you know about the 17 and 18-year-old incidents. Your
Sure.
husband knew about the 17 and
Yep.
18-year-old. You think it's out, and maybe you know you're not totally healed, but it's there and it's handled and it's over and it's past. And now you're happy and you're excited and you're pregnant. And then what's happening? And I love what you said about our subconscious. I think, I'm sure you encounter this too. A lot of our clients are worried that they're worried about rehashing all the trauma. They're worried about reliving it. And there's so many ways and so many different types of therapy to help clear the subconscious. And you do several, I do several, there's tons. And I try to tell clients a lot of times it will come like little movie clips. And it's like there's these disconnected fragments, but it's possible to become whole without watching the whole movie. And I don't know how, and I don't know why. The only thing I'm 100% of in my life and in all of the clients that I've walked with through this, your subconscious knows exactly what is safe to reveal and uncover and heal and when. And I think one of the most powerful gifts we can give people is that ability to trust that again, because that's what you get robbed of with any kind of trauma, is that we talked about that last session of that safety inside yourself, that ability to regulate your nervous system. And yeah, I know clients who pregnancy has triggered some things. I know clients who, and usually we don't see this till hindsight, but sometimes when their children reach the age that their abuse took place, some major things happen.
Exactly what happened to me. So in 2016, my daughter was 6, turning 7, and it was actually 14 days before her 7th birthday that my body revealed the trauma from 2 to 6 years of age. And the trauma ended when I was 6. The sexual abuse ended when I was 6. The trauma didn't end until I was 36. The sexual abuse ended when I was 6. And I subconsciously caused it to end. I was in first grade. I was 6 years old, and I chose to gain weight because he wouldn't touch me if I was overweight. And so there's this huge connection, and I know this could be its own other thing, right? Between uh, extra weight on the body and protection, right? Which to me also limited my ability to feel secure in my body because that extra weight has come and gone throughout my life based on how safe I feel.
Well, and that extra weight often, I've seen that pattern dozens of
Yeah.
times,
Mm.
or more. That extra weight also limits the ability to heal to the extent that you can have some self-love. Because while you did the weight to save yourself, you also hate that about yourself, is often the case. It's often the
I did.
pattern.
I fought it for
Um,
so
and it
long.
just fuels that self-loathing and the shame and all of the things, which then just fuels the suffering.
Yeah. Yep. And so to kind of circle back around the pregnancy piece is, and I know you see this often, I was informed about um, like postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis. I was informed. I don't say I was educated. I think there's a difference. And I knew of it. I wasn't educated in it. And it wasn't until a few months after my son was born that I realized I probably had been suffering with postpartum depression and had no idea. And that's actually when I found yoga, which I attribute to really saving me from postpartum depression. And so much so that when I was pregnant with my daughter and I couldn't practice yoga because of the high risk pregnancy, I couldn't practice the physical postures of yoga.
Mhm.
I had to really rely on the philosophy and deeper practices to help me through that. And when in 2016, you guys, was kind of this like fulcrum point in my story where I hit rock bottom. It was October 26th of 2016. I checked myself in to a hospital for inpatient treatment because I had had allergic reactions to some psych meds. I was not okay. I was pulled off of hormone therapy and psych meds at the same time, and my system went crazy. And there's a whole nother realm of medical malpractice type stuff in there. However, my friends and my husband are like, you need to get additional help. Something's not okay. My point in sharing the story was that getting that additional treatment was one of the best things I did for myself. And the psychiatrist that I met that helped me for the next 7 months after that was a holistic psychiatrist. And he actually said to me, he's like, Kate, if your children weren't as old as they are now, which at that point, they were 10 and 8, right? He's like, I would be diagnosing you with complex PTSD and postpartum depression. Right? He said, because he goes, I don't know that you ever fully came out of that postpartum depression.
Well, how
And
could
I was
you?
like, 10 years later. And he said, yeah, 10 years later.
How do we come out of things that are never fully addressed?
Yeah. And
We don't. We're just
that was
walking
like a
around with it.
mind blowing awareness for me in that moment. And he said that he sees so many women who, I was 25 when I had my son, 28 when I had my daughter. I was 36 at this point talking with him. And he said, I see so many women in their 30s who've had their children and then they go into this mental health decline. And it is really nothing to do with their present day so much as their past coming into the present. And this, you guys, I was so blessed with an amazing psychiatrist. He was a MD neuropsych, PhD, no, MD in psychiatry, PhD in neuroscience, Kundalini yoga teacher, and Tai Chi master. So he walked in both worlds. And he asked me to be his patient because he saw my history when I was in the hospital. And he's like, I understand the world you live in and the world you're walking in, and I will never forget these words. And he said, Kate, your spiritual beliefs are battling your traumas inside you. And that's why you're having all of these things explode. And he's like, you can't have both at the same time. And he said, this is a lot of what happens when people are on a spiritual path with unprocessed trauma.
Wow.
Yeah. And I honestly don't know that there's much more of a spiritual path than motherhood. I don't think there is. I have chills
One,
all over as I say that.
and I don't think I've connected the dots quite like you just put them, but we see tons of women in their 30s who are having, gosh, is it that they're finally addressing mental health things? Is it that it's finally coming to the surface? Whatever language or words you want to put around that. I think part of it is often in that time frame, the kids are now in school. So they have a little bit more bandwidth. They have a little bit more capacity to even allow space for that stuff to come up.
I would
Sometimes
agree
with
with
the
that.
new mom client base, it's really hard because they're not in their bodies and they're not home and they're just trying to find some sort of footing to land on, but they don't really have the capacity to necessarily take all of the healing we're offering because they can't hold anymore. They can't hold anything else. They can't go certain places because they don't have any further capacity. And so, yes, that pattern in the 30s, a lot of times you're sleeping now, your kids are in school, you have some space from them, maybe a little more space to yourself. And yeah, those things start to talk to you and say, are you ready now?
Yeah, that's exactly, I think. I mean, time wise, when I look at it like that, sure, my daughter was in first grade, right? My son was in fourth. So there was more time. I was actually thriving in my private practice as a yoga therapist. And it was like everything to me, it was everything that wasn't built in a healthy way or built on safety had to start crumbling down to rebuild. And the last area, and it wasn't the last, I guess it's one of the areas that's been like woven into my whole life, was my relationship with my body, and therefore my relationship with sex and my relationship with being intimate with another in that way. And so if we want to, moving into that type of
Yeah.
topic, I've been with my husband for 22 years. We've been married for 20. And I was not the type of person, like I know some people when they have sexual trauma, people either become hypersexual or hyposexual. There's usually not much of an in between. I went more hyposexual. And then also being raped by my boyfriend, who I lost my virginity to, made it even more so, right? And then there was one relationship where it was all about chemistry and all that, but that was the relationship that ended, not really ended at that point, but was involved in being drugged and overdosed. And so, and I was not someone who was doing a bunch of drugs. It was something we had chosen to do. I was given a cocktail drug of 17 methamphetamines and roofies. So those of you that have read my book, I wrote a book in 2022 called I Am Strong Enough Now, God Thanks, my journey from trauma to truth. And I write about that story deeply in the book, because at 18, when that happened, it really changed the whole trajectory of my life after that. So I'm grateful for that experience. And what I also understood in that was I was drawn to a certain type of person because of my unresolved past. And that I think is important, because I think sometimes women are like, why are these things happening to me? Why am I drawn to people who hurt me or abuse me or whatever, and that's how it's not the law of attraction. Okay. This is your nervous system that only has certain programming, that it's only going to connect to that which it's already known until you give it new programming.
I'm glad you're making that distinction, because it is not the law of attraction. Yet we can even let's make it a little less emotionally charged for a second. Even just physical injuries, right? You see people that sprained their left ankle and then they twisted their left knee and they hurt their left shoulder. And it's like, what is going on with the left side of their body? And it's that with each different injury, again, complete healing doesn't occur and they're not fully present. We tune out. It hurts too much. We don't want to pay attention. So we check out. So we're not fully present, which leaves that area vulnerable to injury because we're not awake in there. We're not truly in charge of how we're moving that left shoulder and left side of our body. And so you see these repeat injuries, just like, unfortunately, you hear about and know about in trauma research and different things, people that have sustained abuse over and over and over again. And it's like, how could that possibly happen to one person? And it's because, unfortunately, sick predators, I'm going to keep my language behaved today. Sick predators can perceive that in people, and they can perceive that vulnerability. They can perceive that blind spot. So it is, I'm so glad you said it's not law of attraction. It's not what you deserve. Can we go there? It's not some sins of the father BS. It's that, you're not fully healed. So you're not fully home, and they can pick up on that.
Yes. I think that's a really beautiful way to say that. And the amount of people that I've seen that are stuck in it's my fault. What did I do to deserve this? Why does this keep happening? So, it is my prayer that you free yourself from the self-blame. And I know that sometimes those stories, people hold on to that story because they think it will prevent it from happening again. But the only thing that would really prevent it from happening again is healing the nervous system.
100%. And that's part of what perpetuates the suffering.
Yeah.
Is the labels of this must be what I deserve, or this must be something I'm doing to create this pattern, or whatever other things.
And this goes deep into generational trauma and ancestral patterning. And And I love this story. It's a hard story, especially given the times in the world right now, but I'm going to share it really quick. Is my breath therapy trainer taught in Israel for 23 years. And she would teach to professionals. So she only taught integral breath therapy to health professionals. So she would go there teaching counselors, psychotherapists, doctors, and she went there several times a year for 23 years and has a deep heart for the Israeli people. But some of what would happen in these breathing sessions with women and men who were of like the common now generation of times, would their body would start processing out memories that weren't theirs. And it was the memories of their ancestors, of the trauma that their people had endured for centuries, right? That was living in their cellular energy. And because we carry that. So I think about as women, right? Like the egg that formed us was in our grandmother and how that imprints back. And so I say this because sometimes women haven't had the experiences that we're talking about, but something in them feels like maybe they have. And there can be a piece of that generational stuff that happens too, and all of us being connected in this line of female and this line of, being a woman in this world. And we see and hear all these things. So I name that as well. Um, when I was in my yoga therapy program and further education after, I learned that there's the Institute for Trauma Research. That's an international institute. And they did a study on, I don't remember, you guys, it was thousands of people. And their study found that 9 out of 10 people labeled that they have trauma. 9 out of 10. So when I was teaching yoga all the time, they're like, anytime you walk into a class and you have, 40 people, you can bet, right, that 9 out of every 10 have unknown trauma that they're aware of. And the 1 out of 10 that doesn't probably does. They're just unaware of it. Right. And so,
Or they don't feel like it's legitimate to be labeled
sure, it's not
trauma.
enough of a trauma. Right.
Mhm.
So there's that piece of this. And I say that because we're so good at minimizing our own pain, because it's easy to find a story of
I've
someone who
done
had
that.
it worse. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think that that's part of what makes some of these topics like sex difficult for people, because they don't have, if you're not someone who hasn't experienced sexual traumas or molestation or harassment or assault, and I've yet to find a woman who hasn't, at least in some way, right? Then you might feel like, well, why doesn't this work well for me? So, and I think that that's an important piece to touch upon, is like, well, there's a category of women who haven't had what would be labeled as sexual traumas, but they still struggle or suffer with this topic of sex and intimacy and pleasure, and that they sometimes feel like diminished or minimized because they don't have the excuse of the other. Do you find that?
Oh my gosh. Yes, many, many, many clients have said that exact thing. Why? I even went to counseling to see if maybe I had some unresolved trauma and I don't understand. And she was having some vaginismus, which is like tightening of the and pain and spasms of the vaginal canal. And she had waited until marriage to have sex. She very much loved her husband, was looking forward to sex and intimacy. They wanted to get pregnant and have a child. She was healthy, all these things, right, that you would think would be textbook perfection for a healthy relationship and a good sex life. And so, yes, I've definitely heard that is the short answer. And there can be lots of reasons for it. I talk about a lot of them in my sex workshop, but when you go back to the different percentages around, and we couldn't find any kind of category that she identified with or fell into, or a reason, but there can be structural things. Just like sometimes we hold tension in our shoulders and have a tendency to get migraines and neck pain. Some people hold their tension in their pelvic floor just from life, not even from sexual trauma. So yeah, there can be other things and other reasons. And maybe it was generational. We did not go there
Yeah.
with her.
So when I think of it, and there's and not to hone in so much on this to be all about trauma, guys. That's just my story in this.
Yeah.
But there's 4 kinds of trauma. There's little T traumas, big T traumas, collective trauma, and ancestral trauma. Like those are the 4 categories. And so sometimes for women, it's the third, it's the collective trauma. They hear their friends' stories or they hear stories of other women, and the brain and nervous system don't always know the difference of whether it happened to you or not. It's kind of like when you watch a movie and you have this visceral response because that's what the movie's supposed to do. But in your mind, you know, it's just a movie. It's not real. These are actors. There's a green screen. There's food and directors and all the things, right? When we're talking with someone that we're really close with, like a good girlfriend, and they're sharing some of these stories, your nervous system, because there's coherence in your heart connection, is like, oh, is this mine? And sometimes that can get imprinted in as what's called secondary trauma. And
I
so
was,
we don't
yeah,
even know.
right. Well, and never mind all of the patterning, upbringing, messaging, media, patriarchy, blah, 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 all the other things that we're not taught about our bodies, all of the other things about what sex is supposed to be for. I mean, again, we get into that in a
Let's go
workshop of
there.
beliefs.
I think we need to go there from a place of, I remember when I was in my healing journey on this, and I'm still in continual healing, you guys. So this isn't, I'm not done, right? Like my husband and I still navigate a lot of things around this. But I remember early on in my somatic healing, like meaning body based, we talked about that last time, and different programs that I did, right? And for some of you who hear this, you may be like, yeah, I've done that. Some of you may be like, well, I would never even consider that. And Amy teaches this a lot. Like, have you ever held up a mirror to look at the anatomy of your whole vaginal area, right? The whole area of the body and all the different many anatomical parts that are down there. And I remember when someone first told me to do that, and I thought like, oh, you've got to be kidding, right? Like it was so alarming to my system to think that that would be okay to do, especially because within me there was somewhere a memory of that area is dangerous, causes harm, causes pain and suffering. Like that was the story of my body, was that that part of my body was for someone else's like dangerous pleasure. That was my relationship to that part of my body.
My God, I have so much to say. At a minimum, we fucked it up with starting with boys have a penis and girls have a vagina. It's been wrong since then. So if we're going to back up, there went my F-bomb. But if we're going to back up, let's back up. Because women have a clitoris. Our sexual organ is the clitoris. Not, oh, that's how we get our pleasure. That's our fun spot, blah, blah, blah. No, that is literally scientifically, embryologically, developmentally, all whatever words you need to hear to know that it's real. Men have a penis. It swells, becomes engorged, where orgasmic fluid comes out of. Women have a clitoris. That's what swells, becomes engorged, is our pleasure center, has some ejaculation. And so I think ever since childhood, when you learn your body parts, we messed it up all the way back then. And then you add any of this other stuff. And I think there's so many messages around our bodies are for other people's pleasure, whether that's pleasing a partner and a husband, whether that's making a baby and bringing life into the world, whether that's the ways in which we serve and provide. There are so many patterns and messages and things around what it means to be a good woman or a good mother or a good wife. And I'm going to use an example. I think it's from her book, Girls Stop Apologizing, but Rachel Hollis talking about, you never hear somebody being like, oh, Shannon's training for a marathon. Oh my gosh, you're such a great mom. No, we let her train for the marathon, but we might actually question whether or not that makes her a good mom because of all the time she spends running, right? And so just the demands and the expectations and all of those things do not conspire to have healthy body images. Even in my mom daughter know your body workshop, where we try to talk to girls between 12 and 16, and I try to be silly about it a little because it's so awkward. But I'm like, do we get weird about like our armpits, our elbows? Have you ever really looked at your elbow, your weenus, right? Super fun. Like it's got bumpy, weird, wrinkly skin and it can get dry and it's extra skin like your kneecap so that your arm can bend. And we don't get weird about shaving our pits or checking those things out. And there's zero reason whatsoever why we should be weird or have to feel any kind of shame at looking at our own anatomical parts. I mean, we just accept and tolerate boys' hands are down their pants half the time. They're adjusting their junk. They're repositioning, whatever. Their stuff's easier to see and it's out there. And apparently that's fine. And we're not even allowed to like look or wipe or know our own anatomy. It's crazy town, yet that's just how most of us have grown up.
Yeah. It was how, I mean, I grew up Catholic for the early part of my childhood life. And then my family kind of took a different route for a little while, but there were certain topics that you just didn't bring up. And there were certain, conversations that were not had. And so these are the types of conversations that I think are important. And for a woman who's walking a journey of healing from sexual trauma, there are so many layers and stages and processes and all of that need to happen. And honestly, it's the first part of any sort of trauma recovery piece when it involves the body is reclaiming your relationship to the body. And if we don't know about our body, it's very hard to reclaim it. And if we don't understand the way the body has always been trying to protect us and keep us safe, then we might always have this aversion to the body because the body was used against us in some way.
Well, even, I mean, there's so many cultures where historically, like ancient times, whatever you want to go back to, right? Where a woman's time of menstruation, there are some cultures where it was very sacred and a woman was not sent away in a shameful, dirty way, but in a way to rest and honor that week-ish of her life and that month and to rest and to cleanse from that cycle. But there's a ton of cultures where it was dirty and gross. Oh, you're on the rag. Did you ever hear that phrase?
Yeah.
Or like associated with being in a bad mood. Like we don't have a million reasons for that. And just all of these negative associations and beliefs that get taught and brought down and ingrained, even accidentally, even moms who, if you ask them directly, would never want to pass on anything negative to their own daughters, just don't know any different. And it's how they were taught. And I think at a minimum, it's a nuisance. And it's certainly not ever embraced. Well, I should not say never. There are a lot of things recently. I know some groups of women who are structuring their business practices around their cycles.
Yeah.
There's a lot more awareness about syncing with the moon patterns. There's a lot more awareness. Like I love the Fasting Like a Girl book and the ways that we need to do nutrition and hormone expectations and workouts differently based on our cycle. And it is by no means a time of weakness. But it is a time where your body's focusing on a different process. And if we, again, had much healthier education around all of that, something else I'm extremely passionate about, and awareness of our own cycles, it would drastically change our self-image and our body awareness and our confidence in what our own bodies are doing, are capable of, and why. I think a lot less women would end up on birth control. And we're not going to rant on that today, but just in charge of being empowered about your own body and anatomy and physiology and all of those pieces. But culturally, there's so many negative pieces to a lot of it. I mean, hysterectomy is the removal of the uterus. And that original diagnosis in the Latin, when all medical terms came from Latin, was hysteria. Who were the doctors? Who were the ones writing the books? Men. They didn't understand. They still don't understand. Sorry, guys. I don't mean to bash you. It's not your fault either. But the hysterectomy was they thought they could remove the part of us that was making us crazy. What in the actual fuckery was that? In the name of medicine and science.
Yeah. And I'm
So when you
gonna
go back to all
follow
those
that.
origins and yeah,
Yeah. And following that line, and this is not to bash on Western medicine because I have people that I adore that are in that line, but
yes,
I've had clients over the years where their sexual trauma was their first gynecological exam. Right? So they show up at 18, 19 years of age, or maybe even younger because their mom or whoever thinks they need to be on birth control. And they have to have a physical evaluation, right? And the doctor doesn't take time to explain. They don't take time to build rapport and safety and trust. And then this evaluation occurs, and that's their first experience of any sort of penetration or any sort of anything inside of them. And they're frozen in horror at this experience, right? That lasts all of a couple minutes at most in the eval. And then they're like, okay, you're done. You can get dressed now. As a woman who had sexual trauma, those exact words were spoken over me at 2 to 6 years of age, 6 years old, the last time it happened, right? I'm done. You can get dressed now, were the words that my grandfather said to me, right? So when I had those experiences in the gynecological exams, my body remembered, I didn't. And then when I would work with clients and they're like, this is like, they never even connected that, right? That the people that were supposed to be helping them understand were the ones causing the negative impact. And so it's part of why I'm so passionate about trauma-informed healthcare is if we don't realize that we're working with people with nervous systems who have experiences beyond anything we understand when they walk through our door, and we're blessed enough to have the honor to sit with them and to get to connect with them, we have to understand there's so much more happening inside them than what they're going to name. And in the name of all things medical, to me, that should be taken with the highest regard and the most, in those professions, especially the most intimate care. And it's not.
no,
I mean, your
I've definitely
office
had
was the
lots of
first
clients.
time that I
Yeah.
experienced feeling like, oh, I can settle in. These are women who get it and they understand. And then I was blessed to find finally a gynecologist who, it blew me away my first experience with her, because she just sat and pulled up a chair and talked with me for 20 minutes and listened to everything and was extremely trauma informed in her communication. And I will never forget when she said, you're in control. And if at any time you want me to stop the exam, it's done. Like, we don't even have to do this if you don't want to today. Because this was a year and a half ago, right? I'm 42, right? And it wasn't till I was almost 41 that I had this kind of experience with a medical care provider. Now, she was younger and she had been trained. I asked her, I said, you understand trauma-informed care? She's like, I chose to do education in it. It isn't part of their standard education, even now, right? And so
Or an OB-GYN that's in the
for
sacred
an
space
omega,
all the
yeah,
time.
all the time, right? I mean, for people who may not know, and if there's by chance men who listen to this, right? The common thing is they take you back, they weigh you, they put you in a room, they take your blood pressure, right? And then they're like, okay, get undressed, everything off, and here's your robe. The doctor will be in to see you.
Back up. It is a paper gown that you leave
Paper gown.
open.
Yeah, let me tell you, paper gown, open to the front.
And not maybe
Right? And it
cloth.
doesn't cover
I've had a
you.
cloth one and then the paper
Yeah.
part goes over you, but it's
Paper part goes over the lower
robe
body.
sounds like a spa.
Yeah, true. Not, yeah.
Very vulnerable. You're
That's the
naked, it's
picture,
cold.
right? And you
Yeah.
sit there on the table waiting, and then the medical provider comes in. Very rarely do they look you in the eye. Very rarely do they acknowledge you. Sometimes they say, hi, I'm so and so, if you know them. Nice to see you again, whatever it might be. And usually within 5 or 10 minutes, you're laying on your back, your feet are in the stirrups on this table, and their hands are in you doing an exam, and then some other instruments as well. And so I'm painting a pretty rough picture to understand there is no level of gentleness and care most of the time. And then that's a lot of women's first experiences in being tended to or cared for around their, reproductive health. in any way. It's heartbreaking to me how often, how often we get it wrong, and so many ways where we could get it right. And when I think of younger girls, my daughter's 14, and I've worked with girls that are 18, 19, 20, 22, 25, and I think about the experiences that they're harboring right inside. And one of the most horrific things I heard recently by a 19-year-old, this was not a client, I was actually having a service done, and I overheard this conversation. And I heard this girl say, she was talking about something with her friends, and I heard her say, rape doesn't last forever and STD does. And I had a moment of like, do I want to get involved in this conversation or not? Do I want to intervene? I didn't know, like, I wasn't involved in the conversation. I was just listening because I was having a treatment done nearby. And she was talking about how people need to protect themselves from STDs, but that like rape is a one and done thing and it doesn't last forever. And I thought, holy shit, right? Like, hold the line. And it took everything I had not to just jump into that. I don't even know the people, that conversation. And I thought, she's 19. If this is the level of awareness at 19, right, and the lack of education, the lack of understanding, right, and we're still getting it really wrong for these
Oh
younger
my
generations.
gosh. Well, yeah, there's a ton we're getting wrong. Man, my brain is spinning about that one. Part of me, my initial gut thought was she must have been raped, and that's her brain's way of telling
That's
her
what
it's
I
not that
thought
big a
too.
deal.
And
That's her
I went,
trying to
I don't know.
minimize.
Yeah, I don't know.
When
But
I don't even understand the connection between those sentences. Like, STD avoidance would indicate, first of all, that it's consensual enough that you have time to ask for a condom to be put on. Like, what? I don't.
yeah, the fact that
Wow.
they were connected was just as alarming
Yeah.
as the statements themselves.
And of course, we don't know anything because, like you said, she wasn't a client. It was just a
No, I
random
mean, we
overheard.
were both, she actually worked at this place that I was having a treatment at. She wasn't the person working with me. And so it was, but it was just that like, wow, right? It blew my mind to like, that's still where we're at in this, guys. Like, that's still, and I thought, of course, because nobody's having these conversations.
Well, I know so many OBs and midwives and things. And of course, I don't know how all of them do in their practices, but I also think there's something that providers aren't taught and can easily. One reason I choose to have my practice the way it is, but especially in the insurance-based rat race where you're just numbers and in and out, and they're given very little time with clients. I think we forget again to connect on a human level. I think we get in our rut of like, this is what we do all day, every day. So it's so common and ordinary and typical for us. I think a lot of providers almost take your presence there as consent. Like, well, why else would you be here for your pap smear if you weren't fine with what I'm about to do? Not really acknowledging that they might have had it might be their first. I feel like most of them usually know if it's the person's first, how they handle that, whatever. But especially if you're back for a different one, or like we try to reiterate to our clients, yes today doesn't mean yes next time. You handle internal treatment today completely fine doesn't mean you're completely fine next time. And I even ask patients, because I'll get in my own ruts, I'll be distracted, like I'm a human. I did it with a client yesterday, actually. I started to move her shorts to get to her belly before saying, are you okay with me putting my hand on your belly? And usually I say that all the time, especially even if I know someone has specific traumas. And I stopped and I said, I'm so sorry. I totally know better. I'm really sorry. I went ahead with that. I was like, are you okay for me to continue? I'm going to put this hand here and I'd like to put this hand here. Yes or no. But I'd already done the thing. Hopefully the request and the backing off helped and she seemed fine. But like, me with my level of awareness, still we do that. And so I think when they get in that pace and they think basically you're showing up for a certain procedure and you might not know what appointment you made. You just made an appointment with the OB. They're thinking, you made an appointment for a pap smear and what that entails. So there's no explanation. Okay, I'm going to do this and then this, and we're going to put you here and then there. So I think if you ask, and I've worked with a lot of female OBs too, which you'd think they'd have a broader perspective for how it feels, they would never tell you consciously, oh, I don't care. I don't care how the client feels. I don't care if they are traumatized. I don't care if they know what I'm about to do. I don't care about informed consent. None of them would ever consciously say that, but their behavior and their training lacks the ability to act any differently.
Yeah. And I give the grace and benefit of the doubt that it's not a conscious, and much like anything else, if once we know better, hopefully we do better.
But also, like you said, if anyone was going to know better, it should be that population.
I would hope so. And, my experience have been different than it sounds like the colleagues that you affiliate yourself with, which I'm not surprised in that way. I'm very selective of who I network and affiliate myself with now. That would be very different than 10 years ago. I've been in this in my 13th year. And when I think of the way that who I choose to associate myself with professionally is also in alignment with how I've healed personally. And that's important too. But I want to touch base on some of these things. I've had people ask, I've shared some things with clients when they ask, and when people have said, like, how did I first start to kind of reclaim that relationship with my body after? And I know this might sound trite and it might sound silly. And some of you may be like, oh yeah, right. I'm not kidding when I said this. When I would shower and I would wash my body, I would just say, thank you. Thank you, toes. Thank you, feet. And I started with the most basic body washing gratitude practice to feel and sense my body. Right? In the line of work I'm in, it's called reclaiming your skin. Right? And the ability to touch and sense, like even just touching your face or noticing your hands on your arms, like that this is mine. And I would have to make statements like, these are my arms, these are my legs, this is my belly, right? Because my body felt so invaded by others. And so it didn't feel like my own. So I had to reclaim it. This is mine and only mine. And no one else gets to have access to this unless I give 100% consent. So gratitude showers really helped. And then from there, after the shower, it would be lotion. And I would put the best lotion that I loved on my body. And it was a commitment to treat my body in a way that it had never been treated before. So I was really rebirthing a relationship with my physical form as a woman that I'd never been taught. It was very intuitive. Nobody said, hey, Kate, go home and take a gratitude shower. I sat with myself like, how am I going to do this? I want to feel like a healthy adult woman. I felt at that point in my life, I was 37. I felt like a 37-year-old stuck at 17. And I didn't understand why. And so I had to learn first, I had to do a lot of my own healing work, but then a lot of it was, what does my body need? An intuitive connection to myself to say, first and foremost, I just have to start with being able to name parts of my body, to see them, to notice them, to touch them myself, to be able to understand that God created all of this and it is good. And there's not one part of this form that he did wrong, right? And that was created shamefully in any way, right? And I could go down a whole spiral of the whole garden story that I'm not going to go into, but that is part of this, especially if you're someone that comes from religious culture, is there is this just caked on shame that's like, gotta get out of here and clear off that your body is good and it was created in goodness. And I really anchored into that for myself first. And when I would be intimate with my husband, I was there physically present, energetically disconnected, right? So dissociation, able to be physically present, available, mentally, I'm gone. And we all do this all day long, and no one ever knows until they know, right? But when you're someone who has sexual trauma, you're very well aware because you had to do it to survive. What happened? What also happened to me at a very young age, I became hyper aware, and I still am, of when someone else dissociates. And I can name it like that, right? My clients don't like that I can do that, but I can. My kids really don't like that I can do that. My husband hated it because I could tell the moment we were starting to get intimate when he left. But he was unaware of things from that he hadn't dealt with. He doesn't have sexual trauma, but other things from life, right, that caused him to disconnect as well. And so we were two disconnected beings engaging in a sacred act without any sort of intimacy. Like, how many people are there? Right. And unconsciously, consciously, whatever it is. And so I made a commitment to myself that I was no longer going to abandon my body sexually. And I was not going to allow my body to be used sexually without the other person present energetically.
All right. And you feel free to not go here if you don't want to go here. But you just hit on something that I'm sure almost everybody can relate to, whether it's as basic as you agree to a quickie you're not really interested in just because you love your husband and you don't want to disappoint him, or you don't want to, whatever, right? Not super connected, not the best sex of your lives. But also knowing when he's disconnected, when you start to draw those sorts of boundaries, it's a great word, right? Everyone's favorite to talk about. When you start to declare that space for yourself, same exact thing, but I like how that sounds better. The word boundaries just gotten kind of bastardized. But anyway, when you declare those boundaries for yourself, that's going to be new for your husband, your partner, your whatever, fill in the blank for all of you listening. That's going to take a minute. How'd you navigate that?
I remember the very moment because I had been in weekly EMDR from end of 2016 through all of 2021. And then I still go as needed. Like, I was committed and I did a lot of other practices at the same time that were non-traditional. But I remember in 2019, and I remember this because my husband and I moved into the house we live in now in December of 18. And I remember it was spring of 19. And, you know, I pray that he's okay with me sharing this. He knows I share a lot of things, and I'm in the middle of writing my second book, and some of this stuff is in there too. So, you know, God love Eric for all the ways he knows that I share on these things. But I remember where we were really in a beautiful space of renegotiating our relationship sexually because I had healed so much, which was like, I was a different woman in bed because I was no longer sexually traumatized all the time. And he
I
had
want to
been
pause
with,
one quick second.
yeah.
Guys, if we could only also be aware, take the sex piece out of it for a millisecond. Anytime you learn and grow, you're a different person.
Yeah.
When people see you and they haven't seen you in a long time, you're like, oh my gosh, you've changed so much. And that's not always a compliment. But our response should be, oh, thank you so much. Of course I have. Who the heck wants to be the same as they were 3 years ago? But we don't have this cultural embracing or awareness of growing and being different people. And I love that you use the phrase, we were renegotiating. We should be doing that all the time. We're allowed
And
to
I didn't
change our
know that
minds.
then. And
None of
we're
us know
in
that. We don't
constant
have that permission.
negotiation.
Yeah.
Of this. And so I remember, though, because he had done a lot of his work more talk therapy based and other forms. And as I said, he didn't have a lot of sexual trauma. What did happen to him is because of my unprocessed sexual trauma, it got projected onto him. So he was struggling with what's called secondary trauma due to mine. And so when we were navigating some of this stuff, I said very pointed, like direct as I could, I said, my body will no longer be used for anyone else's undealt with past. Period. That was the statement I gave as we were laying in bed together. My body will no longer be used for anyone's undealt with past. I said, so you have to figure out what you want to do about that, because my body, I'm not just going to be okay with this anymore. And he scheduled himself to start an EMDR about a week later. And I had been asking him for a while to try EMDR for some things where he was stuck. And he's like, I don't understand. I've done talk therapy. I'm like, just go. And he came home from one session of EMDR and he's like, I totally understand now. Because you can't talk your way through trauma. You've got to get it out of the body. A lot of ways. EMDR is not the only way, guys. There's a lot of ways. But what I say in that is because as it took both of us doing the work to be able to allow us to have the sex life we have now, and it still needs healing in some ways because we're human and because we're ever evolving humans who choose to do our work. But one of the things that was so beautiful and hard was when we would have questions about a quickie. And because we both had had a lot of sex with each other where there was disconnection. Okay. Great. Sorry for the glitch, guys. We had a little bit of a freeze. But so we had a lot of disconnected sex. And so when we started having really healthy, beautiful, connected sex, and there'd be this request for a quickie or you know, what we call like a bid for connection. We did a lot of Gottman work as a couple and we love it. All right. So Gottman Institute really helped us as a couple to solidify a lot of beautiful things. And one of the terms uses what emotional bid for connection. And there's a lot of different types of emotional bids. And one of them is intimately, and the other person may or may not be ready, right? So one of the things I've learned about myself is I am not the kind of person that just flip the switch, there it is. And I don't know a lot of women that are. I know a few that are. And for my husband and I had to have these conversations where he's like, oh, we got 15 minutes. I'm like, babe, that doesn't work for me like that. And so I would say, like, all right, I'll do this for you. Right. And so I would offer my body in that way. And what we realized was it was actually a trigger for how things used to be. And he never wanted it then. And so we realized the disconnected quickie was so unsatisfying for both of us that it was better to wait until there was more healthy connection. And so that was something that we've negotiated was we would rather have the beautiful, intimate, connected experience than let's just go, you know, romp in bed disconnected because we need to avoid something else that's happening within us. Right. And so I say that because it's different for everyone. And depending on what's happening in my nervous system, I still experience these things where it's like, to me, my sexual energy is the most sacred energy I hold. And the spiritual practices that I walk in and the philosophical practices that I live in also inform me that that is the most sacred energy and to not give it freely and to not give it without consent. And so when my nervous system is unregulated in some way, that is the last thing that anyone's going to have access to. And the only way for me to allow really complete union in that with my husband is for me to feel safe. And so it loops back into our last conversation of anyone that I've worked with in sexual trauma recovery has to reclaim their safety within themselves, which means they have to reclaim their body in order to allow themselves to open up in a healthy way sexually for safe partnership. And once that safe partnership is there, there's a whole world that opens up to explore sexually. But if it's explored without the internal awareness of what's right for me and what's not right for me, then it can also be a form of self-betrayal.
Which will perpetuate all the patterns and all the suffering
Yeah.
and a lot of those negative beliefs. That's been a lot, guys.
Been a lot.
Couple last follow-up questions. Let's give people a couple of tangible tools. You already did. I love the gratitude shower and the lotion. And guys, please don't miss the nuance of her choosing her favorite lotion. And maybe that would mean something more natural or more expensive. But the choice to pick her favorite thing to show value and appreciation for herself. I think maybe, especially for people, if this is kind of their first foray into these conversations, discussing things like feeling safe in within yourself. I think some people might be thinking like, well, duh, if I could, I would. And so, and I know we've said multiple times about several of these layers, there's a lot of ways to get there. So please let that be encouraging. We have a nervous system regulation workshop this Saturday. Kate offers, this won't come out before this Saturday, but we have it again. And Kate holds lots of different activities. She has yoga things. We have yoga things. Why don't you touch on, because again, there's the emotional pieces, there's physical pieces, there's mental pieces. And I know that feels overwhelming. And like, how do I heal all the things? Your body will integrate. Just start finding your way through to safety. Just start trying one piece here, one piece there. And it doesn't always have to be these expensive out-of-network therapies. Breathing. A lot of yoga is not that expensive, especially in comparison to a lot of therapies. It's way more powerful than you know. It's a huge part of why I even opened this space. Specifically, I've just done a massive overhaul on our schedule to include a weekly breathwork class, to include a weekly sound healing class, not just these specialty workshops we were sometimes having. Can you share a little bit? I'm not sure I even recognize what piece our time together fit into. So that's more on the physical side. Where did that piece fit in your journey of getting myofascial work and coming here?
Well, I want to back to one thing, you guys, with yoga. I mean, yoga became one of the daily, it still is a daily process and practice for me to renegotiate my relationship with my body. And it does every day, because every day I hit my mat, my body's different. And so I can't emphasize yoga enough. And I'm going to get really specific here on trauma-informed yoga, because when
Yes,
you're
please.
working through sexual trauma, there's a lot of yoga that will re-traumatize you. So having trauma-informed yoga is really, really important. And having teachers that are trained in that way is really important. There is a beautiful book called Trauma-Informed Yoga for Sexual Assault Survivors that I love, 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 love it. And the second book is Therapeutic Yoga for Trauma Recovery. So those two resources can help you tremendously on your journey. The other thing that is important is when you're in your yoga practice or when you're walking, right? Go on a walk. I really want you to notice the experience you're having inside your body. And it can be as simple as like right foot, left foot, right foot, left foot. Like my right foot is touching the earth. My left foot is, and I know that sounds trite, but it's part of what helps you reclaim this experience that you're in. And then layering in the sensories of what you enjoy, like going on a walk and smelling the air, going on a walk and looking at the plants around you, because these are all ways that we take in pleasure and intimacy with life all around us, to then be able to know what's right for us inside. So there are certain yoga postures that my body loves. There's certain yoga postures that my body wants to avoid. Trauma-informed yoga has nothing to do with do the posture you want to avoid. Right? That's called re-traumatization. Trauma-informed yoga is gently, right, work with the sensation in your body at a level that you feel safe to stay present. There's a huge difference. Right? And so having that choice for yourself, power of choice, right? Being able to come in and out of posture, being able to come in and out of your sexual experience, right? Having a safe word, having things where you're able to name what's right for you and what's not right for you. And a lot of that you won't know till you know, right? And building trust and safety with your partner, that you want to have this really connected, cohesive experience. When I chose to go see Amy in June of 2022. I had known of Amy for years because I have a friend who has taught for her for a long time. And this is a friend that I really trust. And I know she wouldn't affiliate herself with people who weren't of similar mindset and practice. And so when I was working through some physical pain in my right hip, in my SI joint, and also in my pelvic area, I kept contemplating on going to see Amy. I knew nothing about pelvic floor therapy at all. I was very naive to understanding what it was, but I trusted this person who was there. And I thought, I'm just going to go for a consult and see what this is like. My husband was like, "You're going to go have pelvic floor therapy?" I think he knew more about it than I did. And he's like, "This is a really big deal." And I'm like, "Well, I'm glad you're so excited because I don't know what I'm getting myself into yet."
That's amazing.
It was so funny. And so after my consult and then having a first session, and I felt the relief. And part of what I learned was that there was something happening in my body that there was no way I could for myself alleviate. It needed a manual support, like of someone being able to release a certain connective tissue. And but what also happened was this feeling safe around other women to support my own body was new for me, and feeling safe in the container of other women who understood a woman's body more than I understood my own was so refreshing. And so, what ended up happening for me in pelvic floor therapy, more than just releasing this little connective tissue piece, was myofascial release work, which I had had years ago, but I never had the connection to my body to understand what it was doing. And so, Amy and a couple of her providers at the time, like there were times where I would have two of them working on me or three, and there were certain connective places in my body that were uh like firing each other, I guess I would say, and having people work at the same time released and cleared something really really, really critical for my body. And Amy, I don't know if you even remember this, and I'll share this. And those that watch on YouTube will be able to see what I'm saying. Is there was one point where I was in session with them and my arms went like this, right? And I'll show sideways, my arms were like this, and I was holding like this, right? And I was not having internal pelvic floor work done that day. But other things were being like worked on myofascially. And all of a sudden, one of the providers like, "What is happening right now?" And when I was raped, I was stuck under a chair, and my rib cage up was stuck under a chair, and I couldn't move. And I held the chair like this. Right. I always wondered why I just didn't take the chair and like bash it into his head. Right. But I was frozen, and there were 20 other people around the room sleeping. Right. It was prom night. There's the cliche of it all. Right. And, but at my body, right. So I was 40 when this happened, when I went to see Amy, and this happened at 17. Right. So my body was holding in this holding pattern. And what was so beautiful was the way that Amy and her team supported the release of that somatic holding pattern in my body, to be able to just cry and let my body clear what wasn't available for me. And what I learned in that experience, you guys, was there were 10 other girls in that room that night that was happening to me. I know someone heard me say no several times. There's without a doubt that we were in a basement, like the room wasn't that big. Okay. And no, I never told anyone the next day. There's a long story behind this, but what Amy and her team did that I didn't know I needed was be the safe women to console and support me in the most loving way that I didn't get after that trauma happened, because I didn't tell anyone. Right. So sometimes the healing moment, we go in for one thing and we're getting something so much more meaningful because the provider creates the safe container for our heart and our body and our nervous system to be ready to release it. So to me, it was all about a safe relationship with my providers more than the modality that was being offered. So find people you feel safe enough with. and take the time to build the relationship with them so your nervous system knows that it doesn't have to hold this anymore. And I cannot emphasize that enough. Right? And Amy, I don't even know if you know how much that one session just moved so much cleared energy out of my body. But it's not about always the modality that's offered. Please hear that. It's about the connection you feel with the person that's supporting you.
Yeah. I say all the time, like most people have never heard of pelvic floor physical therapy. Most people have never heard of myofascial release. We don't really have a framework for understanding our connective tissue or why that stuff, any link between our physical body and our subconscious is often, because we don't understand it, a lot of us fear it. And it feels very woo-woo, right? Whatever woo-woo is to you. I think at this point, I mostly rely on my felt sense of it because I've been in the work and experienced it for so many years now, since 2009. But it's true. It can happen in TRE. It can happen in yoga. I had a very powerful release by myself doing some yin yoga in the studio completely alone that maybe I wouldn't have allowed myself to have had I been in an actual yin class with other people. So please let it be encouraging that this is available to you in lots of different ways. I think the unique piece about myofascial release is from our very first class with John Barnes, we're trauma informed because that's where he starts. Fight, flight, freeze, fawn, those things that happen in our subconscious. And I was able to help a client yesterday. I need to go back and find where this clip came from. I was just messing around on my phone the other night, and this clip that I think was from a TV show, and a police officer sort of chiding this woman for the lack of evidence about her sexual assault, saying, "Oh, you ladies sure do make it hard on us." Related to not going in sooner, he was specifically criticizing that she must not have fought back because there was no evidence under her fingernails. And at that point, her husband, behind the officer, lost it, grabbed or gained it. I don't know. It was brilliant. Grabbed a knife off of the counter in the knife block, scooped around behind the police officer and held it to his neck. And he said, "Let me explain what's happening to you on a physiological level." And proceeds to explain why you freeze, why you don't say a word, what happens to our brain and brain stem and that primal reptilian response. And why, because women, oh man, there's so much added guilt, shame, and suffering because they like, well, I didn't fight back. I didn't scream. I wore such and such an outfit. I'd been drinking. All the things that get messy in our stories. And if you could have responded differently, you would have. And being able to go to that moment and change it, reframe it, release it, doesn't have to be relive it, doesn't have to be rehash it. Your subconscious will only bring up what it needs to have you let it go and move through it. And I do think a lot of that can happen in the fascial system, but like we've said, it can happen a ton of different ways.
It can happen when you're taking a walk. And it can happen when you're having a conversation with a safe friend over a cup of coffee. It doesn't have to be these really deep cathartic experiences. In fact, I find that the deeper cathartic experiences aren't what create sustainable healing most of the time. And the softer like more subtle experiences are what help our nervous system reprogram actually faster to build that resilience. The other thing I wanted to name for something tangible, right, around this whole relationship around sex, right, is to understand that not only could you potentially be navigating physical experiences, but also the mental stories that you've heard from parents, caregivers, media, TV, and all of that. And I'm going to encourage you to challenge some of those thoughts and beliefs so that you don't have an unhealthy standard in your mind visually or in your mind through your thoughts of what it's supposed to look like or be experienced as, because everyone's body is different. And what is needed for each body is so personal in that area of connectivity through sex and pleasure. And I think that's important to name. And I know you name that in your workshops, and I know you go deeper into that, you guys. So if Amy does these workshops, please go. I hope to go when the next one is, because I think the more we can sit with each other in these conversations and understand that, we're all learning, parts of us are learning, and we're navigating these experiences, hopefully with safe enough communities of people that allow for these healing conversations to occur.
The end.
The end.
I don't know what else. There's so much else and nothing else. How I feel about every conversation with you.
And I'm going to add one more thing that I didn't label before that I think it's important. I had to forgive my body for the ways I thought it betrayed me.
Oh, thank you for going there.
Because I blamed my body for so long. And I didn't understand until I educated myself on the nervous system, like we talked about on part 2, guys. So go back and listen to that one. I didn't understand that what my body always was doing was trying to keep me safe and alive, even if it didn't feel good or okay. And once I forgave myself and forgave my body for the ways that I blamed it, it was kind of like a softening occurred inside my nervous system where there was finally some space. And so self-forgiveness work and forgiveness of my body was really, really important. I chose also forgiveness of others. That's not always within someone's practice. I believe in the power and practice of forgiveness 100%. I'm not here to push that for others. I am here to say for yourself and for your body, it is really, really a beautiful experience to give that to yourself.
Yeah, that's definitely critical because again, I do think we don't understand our nervous systems. And so we don't, that's the story I just gave from that TV show. Women don't understand why they didn't scream or fight. They don't understand. I've had a client who felt so much shame and guilt because she experienced an orgasm during her rape. And that obviously would be extremely confusing. And you can look at research and even men are shown horrific videos of things happening to someone and their body responds with arousal, but it's an altered nervous system response that, again, we don't have conscious control over. Those men weren't actually aroused. They were appalled. But it's science. And if you really want to dive into all the research, go right ahead. Body Keeps the Score is an extraordinary book. But the bottom line is our outward signs don't necessarily indicate our inner reality. And it can be very challenging to not have that, to feel like that doesn't validate your experience. And so we were able to help her process that, but she's been carrying it for over 30 years.
Wow. Mm-hmm. And how
And
many,
so, yeah.
I did, she
What?
did.
Yeah.
And how many people are carrying these guilt and shame wounds around these topics, really because, there hasn't been a safe enough space to talk about them yet.
Well, and we even got into, and this is where I wanted to go with the forgive yourself. I don't want to encourage women to do things for other people.
Mm-hmm.
It's already messages that are heaped on us left and right all the time. But I'm going to say this, let this be an additional motivator to do the work. If you don't find access to healing that allows you to forgive yourself, guess what? You can't receive healing from anyone else. and it will keep distance between you and your children, you and your partner, you and any future partner. So again, don't do it for anyone else, but just know there's additional benefits, rewards, blessings that will abound when you get there, because all of that's kept at bay by that self-protective barrier.
Yes, agreed.
Anything else you want to share?
No, I'm grateful for everyone that's listened to this. I know this hasn't been an easy conversation to receive. Maybe it's something where you finally feel validated or understood or, seen and heard through technology. I feel like because we live in such a high tech world, sometimes that's the most validating experience when we hear other people tell their stories. Like, oh, I'm not alone in this. I can promise you, you are not alone in this. There are so many women that don't discuss these things, and I wonder what the world would be like if we did. It's part of why I serve in the way that I do in this world, and part of why I wanted to take the step with Amy to have this conversation. Is it's one thing to write about it in a book, which I did and continue to in the next one. It's another to sit with someone else that you feel safe with to say, let's do this, let's have this conversation. Let's go there and hopefully help other women know that they're not alone and that healing is available. And there's a lot of ways to access that. So thank you, friend.
Thank you, friend. Love you.
Love you too.
All right, guys, we're going to wrap it up. This has been a long but very important one that we definitely hope you found valuable. Every social media person everywhere on the planet asks everybody to share and like and blah, blah, blah. Whatever the info, whatever the source, just please help women find safe spaces. Just please, it doesn't have to be me and Kate. Please just share something. Help spread the message that there are so many different answers and that there are people that understand and that there is trauma-informed care on every possible realm that you would need. It takes a lot of digging, but we have a lot of resources. So please share the fact that there's help. Share the fact that we all deserve this level of healing. And if that happens through this episode, then we're all the more grateful. But just share something with someone so that we can all, that helps with all of the collective trauma too. We could do a whole other episode about the Me Too movement and Nasser and all the things, right? Anyway, I love you guys. Going to keep changing the conversations, right? So we'll put the show notes and different things together for you and link the parts 1 and part 2. I really encourage you to listen to those if you haven't already. That'll help connect even more dots, and all of Kate's info and ways to reach her and all the stuff that we have and resources going on too. So stay tuned until next time, and we will be back with you soon.